Thank you.
Please come and have a seat with us.
Thank you.
Eleanor, I think you're going to introduce a very interesting gentleman who's a professor at HEC, or HEC in French, an author on strategic thinking, but also particularly on how to design a decision process. So maybe you could introduce him.
Yes, I'm very happy we have Olivier Sibony, who is also a very famous TED Talk presenter. He specializes in decision making and targeting the topic on culture. What better way to decompose culture but to talk about biases and ethics when we make decisions, may that be individual, collective or corporate. So welcome to Olivier for a very interesting and different topic.
Good morning. It's difficult to make decisions in a big, diverse organization like yours. But however big and however diverse and however complex, you're always going to make decisions using your brains. So I'd like to talk to you about how we actually use our brains when we decide. And to do that, I'm going to first ask you to play a few games. So please take a piece of paper, or maybe your smartphone, if paper is too old-fashioned and not digital enough for you. And I'm going to ask you three very simple questions. The first question is, relative to others, how well do you drive? I'm going to assume that you all have your driving license. So assume the world is divided in 4 groups, the A drivers, the B drivers, the C drivers, and the D drivers, 4 groups of equal size. And give yourselves a grade. Are you an A driver, meaning top quartile, B driver, meaning you're above the median, C driver, below the median, or D driver if you're in the bottom quartile. So just write down A, B, C, or D. Are we done? Good. Second question. It's the same question except that relative to others, I'd like to know how well you draw. So suppose I asked you to take a piece of paper and to draw a picture of me right now, which would be very good for my ego, I'm sure. Would you have an A drawing, a B drawing, or C drawing, or a D drawing? So relative to others, how well do you draw? Third question. I'm going to ask you to watch this little video segment, it's short, and to count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. So let's have the video.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
Okay, so just write down the number of passes. Now, at the risk of scaring you, I'm going to walk you through just a little bit of theory. Now, I know that theory word is very scary, but it won't hurt. I'm going to give you 2 minutes of theory about how we think. Let me first tell you how we think we think. We think like this. We think we are rational people, that we sit down and we think, and we are like Rodin's thinker. And for instance, when we make a business decision, we make a business plan, we anticipate the future, we forecast, we calculate the risk, we use a discounted cash flow or something like this, and we come up to a rational decision about should we take the risk, should we make the investment, should we do the business plan. Or when somebody makes an ethical decision, we think they do a fairly rational calculation, right? I mean, what's the benefit of cheating or lying or stealing, and what's the probability that I'm going to get caught, and if it's worth the risk, or if I think there's no way I'm going to get caught, maybe I'm going to let myself be tempted. That model of rational thinking is basically the model of economics. That's what all economic theories are based upon. And that's the traditional model. We think we're rational. We think our clients are rational, we think our customers are rational, we think our colleagues are rational, and we think, most importantly, that we are rational. Now, over the past 30 years, cognitive psychology has evolved to show that, in fact, we're not rational and has developed something called dual process theory, which basically says, I'm going to give you the fastest, simplest oversimplification of dual process theory you'll ever get. It basically says that Deep Blue, which you see here, and Kasparov, which you see here, coexist in our brains. We all have two brains, we all have two systems, and that's, by the way, not the left brain and the right brain that you've heard about many times, but we have something called a system 1 and a system 2. We have a way of thinking that is fast and intuitive, and that puts ideas in our mind very quickly. That's the system 1. It's always on, it's very fast, very intuitive, very human. We are not conscious that we use it. We are not aware of making an effort when we use it, and it's there all the time. When Kasparov plays chess, he has lots of ideas coming to him, and he basically uses his system 1. Then he double checks. Then he does a few calculations to anticipate counter moves and so on. But basically, he uses system 1. When a machine like Deep Blue, which beat Kasparov many years ago, plays chess, it does systematic calculations in an effortful way. It basically computes move by move. And we're all capable of doing those two things. We all have these two systems in our mind. We are a divided self, in a way. We are a divided thinker with complex interactions between system 1 and system 2. We all use these two systems all the time. How does this work? Let's look at the consequences of that on some of your decisions. How many of you gave themselves a D? How many of you are in the bottom quartile of drivers? Raise your hands. Yeah, 1 or 2 people. Keep your hands up, please. How many are C? How many are below average? Yeah, we've got about maybe 10 people here. Thank you. Please put your hands down. How many are A or B? Yeah. We got about 95% of people who are above the median, which is statistically amazing, but actually not amazing at all. Because every time you do this test, you get the same result. I could actually produce the slide before I saw you. 90% of people drive better than the median. Always. You can do this test anywhere, in any country. You can even do it in a hospital. This has been done. You can do it in a hospital where people have been hospitalized after a traffic accident. And 90% of them will tell you they drive better than average. You can ask people in academia, like me, if they think they are better professors than average. 94% of them think that they are better than average. You can ask entrepreneurs if you think they are going to be successful. 90% of them think they are going to succeed, even after you remind them that 70% of new businesses fail, unfortunately. You can ask, of course, people who are getting married after reminding them that half of marriages end in divorce if they think their marriage will end in divorce. And of course, 100% of them, as they walk down the aisle, do not think so. That is a phenomenon, a cognitive bias called overconfidence. We overestimate ourselves quite systematically, or at least we think so. Because let me get to the second question. How many of you are A or B drawers? How many of you draw better than average? Oh, it's interesting. Only about 3, 4 people. And how many of you think you are below average, C or D, on drawing? Wow. Amazing. So what happened to overconfidence? About only 20% of people draw better than average. In fact, in this group, even less because, hey, you're bankers. So it seems we also are capable of underconfidence. You hear a lot about overconfidence as a cognitive bias, but actually, life seems to be more complicated than that. We can be overconfident about some things, but also terribly underconfident about other things like drawing, because it is just as irrational to underestimate our skill in drawing as it is irrational to overestimate our skill in driving, right? I mean, we are just as wrong when 20% of us think that we are below the median as we are when 90% of us think that we are above the median, or almost as wrong. So how is that possible? Well, what you see here is a very interesting feature of our system 1, our intuitive brain, which answered this question for you. The feature is that system 1 actually does not answer the question you ask. It finds an easier question. System 1 is very good at answering an easier question, and the easier question it answers is, what comes to mind most easily? What can I think of? And how do I compare to that? So when I ask you how well you drive relative to others, that's actually a very difficult question to answer. What does it mean to drive well? Does it mean drive quick, drive safely, drive often? I mean, what exactly does it mean? How well do other people drive? I don't know. How could I possibly compare myself to that? So what comes to mind? Well, what comes to mind is that I do see traffic accidents from time to time, and they are memorable. So compared to that, if I haven't had any accident, I think of myself as someone who drives well. Now, if I ask you about drawing, what comes to mind? Museums. You never actually see bad drawings. All you see are good drawings and good paintings. So relative to that, you're terrible. And so am I, by the way. We're all terrible relative to Picasso. And since that's what comes to mind, we answer the question, how good am I relative to what I can think of, not relative to the median of the population? System 1 answers an easier question than the question you ask. That leads to many problems, as we will see in a minute. System 1 also does something very interesting. How many of you counted the passes, and how many passes did you come up with? 15? 16? Raise your hand if it's 16. Good, you can count. You're bankers. That's good news. I'm reassured. I'm not taking my account away from your bank. How many of you saw the gorilla? So about half the people saw the gorilla. There was actually a gorilla. If you didn't see the gorilla, at some point there was a gorilla walking and doing a little gorilla thing and going away. When you haven't been briefed about the gorilla, most people miss the gorilla. But of course, a lot of people have heard about the gorilla, haven't you? How many people noticed something else that was very bizarre? Raise your hands if you noticed something other than the gorilla that was very bizarre. What did you notice? The curtain changed color. How many people noticed that the curtain changed from red to yellow? Raise your hands if you did. Yeah, we got about 3 people in this whole room. And how many people noticed that one of the players in black left after a while, and in the end there were only 2 black players for 3 white players? So about 3 people noticed. But most people did not notice those things because a key feature of System 1 is that System 1 never actually looks. It looks for something. It looks for confirmation. So if you're looking to count the passes, you will miss the gorilla. If you've been briefed about the gorilla, you will miss the curtain. If you know about the curtain, you will miss the black player leaving the scene. But basically, you're looking for something. You're never just observing. And that's how you can miss some pretty important things in life. Pretty important things. So these are just 2 features of System 1 that I wanted you to get familiar with. I'm going to show you a few of their manifestations in business, which take many forms, many forms. I'm going to speak briefly about 2 of these forms, which are called bounded rationality. You've probably heard of that. That's also called cognitive biases, as Elena was saying. So the mistakes we make in our reasoning. And there's another aspect of this that is interesting, which is bounded ethicality, as it's sometimes called. So the mistakes we make or the problems we have with our ethics, which I thought would be interesting for this group. Bounded rationality first. Let me tell you an interesting story. This story happens at P&G, Procter & Gamble, which, as you know, is a very admirable company, which is famous for the quality of its thinking and its decisions, and especially its marketing decisions. And the main protagonist of this story is A.G. Lafley, who is admired as the most successful CEO P&G has ever had, and as arguably one of the great business leaders of the past 20 years or so. In fact, such a great business leader that when he left P&G after a great tenure, his successor succeeded him, and then they called him back a few years later to say, please come back because your successor is not as good as you are. So, basic hero. And here's the story this guy, who is a hero of business, tells. When he was a young product manager, he decided that it would be a good idea to go for the bleach market. So bleach, you know what bleach is, it basically cleans, and the leader of bleach in the US is a company called Clorox, which makes a brand of bleach called Clorox. And it's the arch leader in the bleach market. Clorox is synonymous for bleach in the US, like Bic would be synonymous for pen, or Frigidaire for fridge, basically. And so they plan to launch a new product. They test it. They do all the good things that you do in P&G. And eventually they get to the point where they say, we have a great product, the consumers like it, the customers, the trade likes it. We're going to launch it. We're going to start with a test market in Maine, small state, and as far away as we can be from the headquarters of Clorox, which are in San Francisco, so that we hope to fly under the radar. We hope they won't see us. So they do the test market. They put the new product in the stores, and they do the advertising on TV, and they spend a lot of money. And what happens? A week later, Clorox drops a gallon of free bleach on the doorstep of every house in Maine as a free sample with a little note that says, this is a gift from Clorox to our beloved customers in Maine. What was Clorox doing? Clorox was saying, P&G, don't even think about this. We will fight to death to defend this market. We are prepared to give 6 months worth of bleach as a free sample to every house in the country to keep you away from this market. Because we are Clorox. This is our main product. This is where we make probably more than 100% of our profit. So it would be totally stupid and suicidal of us to let you get into this market. We won't let you get in. And the conclusion Lafley draws from this is World War I style assaults on world cities will, of course, end up with a lot of casualties. The funny thing is, as Lafley himself says, this was almost obvious. You could predict that Clorox would respond like this. It was completely rational of Clorox not to let P&G get into this market. But P&G simply did not think of this, because we don't put ourselves in the shoes of our competitors. It is a phenomenon called competitor neglect. When we are P&G, we don't think of what Clorox will do. We say, here's our strategic plan. We're going to do A, we're going to get result B. And the competitor, well, the competitor, they will just let us do it. We don't think of it. It's a classic manifestation of overconfidence. When I look at the strategic plans of companies, and I've done this many times in my past careers, there is never a page that says, here is what the competitor will do in response to our plan. We just don't think of this. We say, here's who the competitor is, here's what we're going to do, and here's the result we will get. We don't anticipate the response. It's one of the many manifestations of the overconfidence we talked about a minute ago. And it's one of many, many biases that sometimes lead us to make not quite rational business decisions, even when we are great companies and great business people like P&G and A.G. Lafley. So that's only one example. Let me move on to the second topic, which is less well known and which is closer to the forefront of research, which is bounded ethicality, how this divided brain makes us make bizarre ethical decisions from time to time. Let me play another game with you, actually. Let me ask you to put yourself in another situation. Suppose you go to a vending machine to buy a piece of candy. Let's say you want a Kit Kat or a Mars or whatever. And you put the money in and you get the bar, but the money comes back. So the candy is actually free. What do? Do you take a second bar for free? And then a third one? And a fourth one? And do you actually empty the machine and go fetch a bag or a suitcase and fill it up with all the free candy? So how many of you will stop at one bar? Good. I'm reassured. How many of you will take two? Yeah, it's tempting, isn't it? How many of you will take three? Yeah. How many of you will take more than three? Yeah, a few people. You're rational. Congratulations. But actually, very few people. This experiment has been done with a hidden camera. And with a big note on the vending machine that says, if you notice any problem with this machine, please call this 800 number, which no one does. Now, the funny thing is, you probably answered quite honestly how many you will take. The truth is, almost no one takes more than 3 bars. Almost no one, when their colleagues are not watching their answer, which of course can bias it a little bit, when their colleagues are not watching their answer and when they don't know they're being watched, they don't take more than 3 bars. If you then interview them and you say, but why didn't you take more than 3 bars? They say things like, well, you know, the first one I thought it was a mistake, so I just put in another coin just to see. And then the third one, well, you know, there's been a few times in my life when vending machines did not actually give me the candy and they kept the coin, so I was sort of re-establishing cosmic justice there. Right? So, but 4, no, that would be stealing. So this funny experiment, which was done by Dan Ariely in Duke, actually shows you something very interesting, which is that we cheat to some extent, but only to the extent that we can keep a reasonably good self-image. We cheat, but we want to be able to look at ourselves in the mirror and to look at a basically honest person. So we need to come up with a story. And that story is made up by system 2. That very smart analytical brain we have is very, very good at coming up with stories that, by the way, don't make any sense because, of course, you know, taking from one vending machine to compensate the loss we had from another one, it does not make any rational sense and is not ethical under any definition of ethics that any philosopher in the history of moral philosophy has ever come up with. But we can come up with a creative idea, with a creative solution that tells us, you know, this sort of makes sense and we can still look at ourselves in the mirror and feel good. So system 2 is good to make rational decisions, but it can also be a little bit troublesome when we make ethical decisions. Which gets us to banking. You, of course, know this story of Wells Fargo, which finally cost the CEO his job yesterday. The amazing thing to me here is that there were more than 5,000 people there who were doing things like forging the signatures of their customers and creating fake PIN numbers and fake email accounts and so on. 5,300 employees, that's a lot of people. What were they thinking? What stories were they telling themselves? So if you look at the interviews, they were saying things like, well, there was no explicit rule saying it was forbidden to forge a signature. Well, yeah, of course there isn't. It's sort of obvious, isn't it? We thought it was good for customers because the products we're selling are actually great products. And yeah, sure, they're great products. They, you know, it will be valuable for them to have a savings account in addition to their current account. And everybody else is doing it. And I already did it for some reason last time because the customer asked me to actually simplify his life, so why not forge his signature this time? And so on and so forth. We can create those justifications. We can create those stories to make it look acceptable to ourselves, when in fact, these are basically decent people. If their customers walked out of their office during a meeting and left their wallet, would they actually take a banknote from their wallet? Of course they wouldn't. They wouldn't do that. You know, not just they wouldn't do it for themselves, they wouldn't take $10 to put it in the bank's cash register to say, you know, I made $10 for the bank. Because this feels emotionally wrong. This is stealing. It's very clear this is stealing. You can't make up a story that justifies taking a $10 bill from somebody's pocket. That just won't do. Emotionally, our system 1 is telling us, no, don't do this. And we all have a system 1. So here's an interesting experiment that was done by 3 Swiss scientists a few years ago who recruited 100 bankers and who asked themselves, what does it take for a banker to become dishonest? And they actually published the findings in Nature, which is the most prestigious scientific review in the world. Here's the experiment they did. They recruited those bankers and they said, your task is that you're going to toss a coin, a fair coin, 10 times. You will do this alone. And you will write down the results. And for every heads you will get 20 euros. And for every tails, you will get 0. So on average, of course, you should get 5 times head and 5 times tail. But you know, it's luck. Some of you might be lucky and some of you might be less lucky. It's totally up to you to tell you if you've been lucky or not lucky. And we will pay you up to 200 euros depending on the result. Which, of course, is a tempting experiment, a little bit like that vending machine we talked about. Then they divided the group into 2 groups. One group was asked questions about their bank before they did the experiment. How long have you been there? And what's your position at the bank? And who do you report to at the bank? A lot of questions with the word bank to basically prime them, that's the psychological term, about their banker identity, reminding them essentially that they're bankers. And the other group was asked filler questions, which are basically, how much TV do you watch and how many kids do you have? So basically reminding them that they're not just bankers, they're also people who go home and have another life. And what do you think happens? The latter group, the control group, the people who are not reminded that they are bankers, actually do not cheat. They are bankers, and of course they don't cheat when you ask them to play this game. They're a little bit luckier than average, it turns out. A little bit, but not statistically significantly. You can see here that a few more people than you would expect. The blue bars are the expected random distribution. A little more people are above average, but actually not enough people that this would be a statistically significant difference. However, if you look at the group who has been reminded that they are bankers, you see a very different number. You see, in fact, that suddenly quite a lot of people got 10 times heads, which is very statistically unlikely, and a significant number got 6 and 7 times and 8 times heads out of 10 times, which is very, very, very strange. In fact, statistically, it is almost certain that 26% of them at least cheated. It's 99% certain that 26% of them cheat. And the payout, on average, is 13% higher. So this would cost an employer 13% cost, basically. Which basically tells you that depending on whether we are reminded or not reminded that we are bankers, and remember, these are the same people, we will behave very differently. That is the power of culture. Culture forges our identity and tells us how to behave in ways that we are not aware of. These people are not making conscious decisions of what are the odds that I'm going to get caught, because if they were completely rational, they would actually cheat all the time. In this game, you can come back and say, give me 200 euros, and nobody will punish you. But this is a little bit more tempting or a little bit more acceptable to yourself when you're in a culture that tells you this is acceptable than when you're in a culture that tells you it's not acceptable, which is an interesting thing to think about. So what can we do about this? What can we do about bounded rationality and bounded ethicality? The first thing we can do is remember that we have these two systems, and contrary to what you sometimes hear and read, it's not a good system and a bad system. It's not a bad system, one that makes off-the-cuff, quick, intuitive decisions, and a good rational system, two, that is sensible and rational and unemotional and fact-based and numerical and so on. Because on some decisions, like the ethical decisions, you actually need a system one to tell you, hey, stop, forging a signature, that's wrong. You wouldn't let your kids do it on their grade report, so why would you do it at the bank? You're not just a banker, you're a human being with values. That's your system one talking. So you need both. You need emotions and reason. You need logic and intuition. You need both things all the time. You have these two brains, and you need to use both in the right way. And what is the right way? That is very difficult to tell, but one thing to remember is that it's you, and it's somebody else, and it's somebody else, and it's a lot of people in an organization making those decisions. The decision maker is not alone. You are not alone with your system one and your system two. You are part of an organization. And however frustrated we can sometimes be with organizations, and God knows we are, they are much better on average at making difficult decisions than individuals are. In fact, that's why they exist. So how can we build organizations that are better at making decisions that we as individuals could be, whether it's the rational business decisions or the tough ethical calls? How do we do these things? It's not something you can summarize in 2 minutes, but I'm going to try. The basic idea is that you need two things. First, you need decision processes. You need rules. You need mechanics. Take A.G. Lafley, for instance. What did he do after this experiment? After this, he learned from this failure to anticipate the reactions of competitors. He created a strategic planning process that basically forces them to think about the reactions of competitors. And that's a mistake they will hopefully make less in the future. I won't say they won't make it again, but they will make it less in the future because they've created a process, a rule, a norm, a guideline that says you have to think about your competitors. Likewise, of course, if you're talking about ethics, you need rules and you need procedures and you need standards and you need codes of conduct and laws, basically. And of course, you don't need to be reminded of that. You have lots of those rules and procedures, maybe even more than you need. So you need rules, you need decision processes, you need those things in an organization. But that's not enough. Organizations are like you, they need two systems. They need those rules, they need those processes, but they also need, at the same time, to have teamwork and collegiality. Because think again of those people at Wells Fargo. Are they going to find a rule that says, don't forge signatures? No, because that's kind of obvious, and you can never anticipate everything in the rules. What is likely is that they will actually find conflicts between rules. I'm sure if I take all the rules and all the procedures that you have many situations where you can find a rule that tells you to do one thing and a rule that tells you to do something else. And it's very difficult to make decisions based on contradictory rules. So what do? Well, you go talk to someone you trust. You have people on your team. You have supervisors, you have colleagues, you have peers, you have people whose judgment you value. You have people you trust. And an organization cannot work by rules only. It also needs teamwork, preferably with diverse people, with diverse perspectives and diverse preferences. It needs debate. It needs a culture where you are free to challenge others and to have diverging opinions and to push back a little bit until you get to a decision. And needs a culture where you have the trust to open up and to express those diverse and diverging opinions so that you will actually resolve the tensions between the rules. So just like you have two brains, you have the system 1 and the system 2, your organization, and you need both, you need the logic and the emotion, your organization will not work, your culture will not be a functional one if you do not have these two things. You need the rules and the processes and the norms, and you also need a culture of collegiality and trust and debate, and it's by making these two things work together